And the video is now going as well.
So you're now on for posterity.
We have to behave ourselves.
Yeah.
I just was getting ready to tell the joke.
Well, as long as the joke is a funny one, I mean, it's probably okay to have it be on the video. It's just if it's
let's not test that.
just if it's bombs, you know, that's when you don't.
I don't want the Arizona Republic to be the test of that.
We have a barking dog on the phone. Hit mute.
Yeah, they did.
Someone else just joined.
Got two more.
Hi, this is Mala from the Arizona State Library.
Seems like only moments ago, Mala.
Hi,
Welcome
Mala,
back.
yeah. Seems like we were just talking.
I know. Did you guys have a chance to grab lunch at least?
No, I don't think so. So are you participating in all the task forces?
No, 3.
Okay.
And it just seems to be coming so close together. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Did you have a task force this morning?
Yes. Feels like that's all I do anymore.
I know.
So who are we waiting for?
This is Steve Peters down in Tucson.
Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve. Hey, Steve. I apologize for not having gotten back to you after your phone message, but it has been mildly overwhelming for the last couple of days.
No problem, Mike. I actually talked with Eric the other day, so I'm good.
Good, good.
This is Kelly Udall, town of Pine Top Lakeside.
Hi, Kelly. We're still kind of waiting to get started. We'll do a roll call in the next like 3 minutes or so, and make sure everybody knows both who's in the room and who's on the phone.
That's good.
My stomach's growling because of lack of lunch. I wonder if the recorder will pick that up.
Notice how quiet it's got and they started recording.
Yeah.
It was full of chatter before, then all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric or Mike, how do I get my name on this thing officially?
Yeah,
It is now.
it is now. We recognize that you were missing.
We oopsed.
I'm always
And I was asking him, I said, you know, Bill Boland, economic development. I mean, he is economic development. What,
Right.
you know.
Well, I didn't know exactly where to sign on or how to or anything.
We'll get your name on there, and
I'll bet you that could be fixed.
I'm sure you'll fix it.
I'll send out an updated list
Mike?
after the meeting.
Yes?
Mike, is there a presentation today too or not?
No, I'm going
Still
to.
on anywhere?
I'm going to say there's no presentation to look at. I'm going to talk about some logistics and some structural issues. And then I also apologize. I'm going to have to leave the meeting early. But Eric and Jeff can continue to do any coordination that's necessary. I'm on a panel at GovSec West on the other side of town. So I can't really stiff them. I've got to be here too. So I think we can go ahead though and get started. Why don't we start by roll call? Can we start with you? Kind of go around the table?
Sure. My name is Dave Griffiths. I'm the IT director for Customer Union High School District.
Deborah Dupay, Advanced Tech Solutions President, and also board member on ATIC and Gazelle.
Busy lady.
I'm Bill Boland, Systems Technology and Staffing and Chair of ATIC.
Bob Burns, Arizona Senate, retired. Brian Gilbert, I do wireless telecommunications consulting in Northern Arizona.
Horace Friesen, I'm Vice Chair of ATIC, Arizona Telecommunications and Information Council, and an independent consultant.
Ralph Gersh, board member of ATIC, and also a board member of the Arizona Telemedicine Council.
Mike Golden, Asset Director of the Arizona Broadband Project.
Jeff Crane, Project Manager.
Eric Thomas, Project Manager.
And then can we have people on the phone tell us who's there and what your organization is?
Sure. This is Steve Peters. I'm down in Tucson. I'm a coordinator of the Greater Arizona E-Learning Association. I'm also an ATIC board member and chair of the ATIC Strategy Committee.
Thanks, Steve.
And this is Mike Whippo,
board member of Greater Arizona E-Learning Association and also an associate of the Arizona Telecommunications and Information Council.
This is Fred Estrella, the CIO at Northern Arizona University.
Great, thank
My name
you.
is Kelly Udall. I'm the town manager for Pine Top Lakeside.
A few more.
Hi, Kelly.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And this is Mala Muralidharan from the Arizona State Library. I also do the e-read for the State Library.
Anyone else on the
Al
phone?
Crawford, representing the Shores Homeowners Association and ATIC.
Terrific, thank you. Anyone else that we didn't hear from?
That's all we know about.
Great. Well, we can get started. This is the initial meeting of the task group that we have called the Rural Community Outreach and Economic Development Group, and we have only one remaining task group that has not yet had its first meeting. Is that right?
That's correct.
What is that?
That's the strategic plan.
The strategic plan task group. In many cases, there are people who are on 2 or 3 of these task groups, so hopefully that's going to help too with cross-pollination of information and decisions and conversations that happen in the individual task groups. A couple of details, though, that are important to deal with. One of them is the logistics of these groups. Asset does not have sufficient staff to be able to actually support the logistics of these individual task groups. We will focus on the logistic support for the council itself, for the larger council, and we'll provide the rooms and recording capabilities for the task group meetings themselves. But we would like to ask each group, and have asked each group, to identify an individual within the group who is willing to create the agenda for each task group meeting and to coordinate the scheduling of future meetings. We're recommending that either Doodle or what's the system you use, Deborah?
Meeting Wizard.
Meeting Wizard be used to do that through email, and that seems to have actually worked pretty effectively in the other task groups. So before this group adjourns today, it would be a good idea if amongst yourselves you can decide. The way that sort of works is everybody in the room steps back and there's one person sitting there having volunteered to do that.
Well, no, the people on the phone too. Don't forget there are people on the phone.
And there's certainly people on the phone are certainly invited to take on that
Definitely.
responsibility.
Well, maybe it's better to.
But we're ducking.
We'll find you.
Yeah, we can't see what you're doing there.
That's a good thing.
Ew. So, yeah, if someone will just handle that before the group leaves and pick somebody to do that, that would be terrific. And if you'll remind them if that hasn't happened, well, because I'm going to be gone, we can get that done.
Notice how he ducks out on that part.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I'm afraid of getting beat up around the head and shoulders. The other issue is that although we've the council has created these 6 task groups and the asset staff has recommended what they be, they really are just different viewpoints and focuses around a broader issue, which is that we're trying to orchestrate creating a demonstration project. It might even prove to be, after last conference, or last task group, might even be 2 different projects, but that demonstrates a couple of fundamental but related things. One of them is that the infrastructure model that we're proposing in the strategic plan that was presented at the first council meeting get demonstrated and proven that the economics of it will work, and that carriers will participate in that model, or providers will participate in that model and actually pull fiber through conduit, and that the dual use cell tower idea will actually beam bandwidth into communities that are now lacking bandwidth from the fiber that's pulled into those conduits along highways or other rights of way. We also need to demonstrate that we can do something about the permitting issues and easement issues to speed up or accelerate the rate at which this test or demonstration infrastructure can go in. Concurrent with that, however, we also need to demonstrate that significant applications can also run across this infrastructure. So that's why we have the e-learning task force group and the e-health task force group and now the economic development group, such that all of these things come together to make the case to the state at large and to the legislature and to the governor's office that there's serious, measurable benefits that can come out of implementing the strategic plan, first at a demonstration level, and then later by actually creating funding mechanisms to be able to roll it out throughout the entire rural areas of the state. And by the way, to make a distinction too, the permitting, the creation of a broadband infrastructure coordination office, which is one of the draft pieces of legislation that we're working on, is important to the providers, not just for rural Arizona. They want to see some kind of a standardization process that the state could do both in urban areas as well as in rural areas, because getting permits and easements is one of the single highest cost and most time-consuming aspects of what they do as they attempt to try to build out in the state. So we would hope that as the groups begin to get into their individual conversations about how to do these things around the topic area of the group, that there will also be some cross-fertilization and exchange of information between groups, such that we wind up at the end of this process with a coherent single plan that can be presented to the legislature and to the governor's office. So another comment, however, is that, and this started out my Monday not very wonderfully. We had proposed, perhaps naively, that one of the ways to fund doing the statewide program to get the conduits in the ground as an incentive to get carriers to make investments in rural infrastructure might be funded by some kind of a small fee added to internet service provider bills. We had done a calculation that said the entire state could be covered, the rural portions of the state could be covered with conduit over about a 5-year period for a fee of around 20 to 40 cents on an ISP bill. On the other hand, we have presented that model to the governor's office, and they have said we are dealing with quote unquote a high maintenance legislature, and we already have a plate full of things that we're asking them to vote on that all involve money. We may be in a position where we have to ask the legislature to extend the 1% sales tax beyond the time frame that we originally proposed. So we do not want to add something that could be perceived as another tax into the into what we're going to ask the legislature to do. On the other hand, if you have enthusiastic and passionate supporters and providers, which is a novel thing for us, around this whole plan, if those voices come together collectively and want to communicate to the legislature that this is something that ought to be done and ought to be done in this legislative cycle, go for it. It's just the governor, we as the governor's office, will not take that on this time around.
So within the context of universal service, obviously the entire dial tone universal service program at the federal level is being rethought and recast.
Yes.
Anyone have a take on whether states themselves might be a conduit for the spending of federal USF funds versus them being carrier specific as they always were?
Yeah, a different kind of conduit. I think the situation about how that's going to unfold is still uncertain. We're kind of waiting to find out, what constraints the feds are going to put around it. We have heard that the states, that the feds want the states to be involved in the management of those funds as they become broadband universal service funds, but we have not heard any specific guidelines about how that needs to come down. In the conversation that we had with some key CenturyLink people in the last conference, however, they seem to be pretty sanguine, I guess would be the word, that it may be possible to use those funds with their blessing to do what we're trying to accomplish. They are amazingly on board with this whole conduit model and believe that it will fundamentally impact their ability and willingness to build out infrastructure in rural communities that they wouldn't have touched prior to this proposal.
And the other place to keep our eye out is...
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, sorry. The Federal Highway Administration themselves might come to agreement with the FCC and others to specifically have a incremental highway funding allocation.
And that would be more than just funding. That would also mean that they would release interstate right-of-ways for this use as well, which is another key issue. So there's a lot of stuff like that that's in flux that may prove to be ultimate sources of funding for this.
Mike, I'd suggest that we have a matrix of availability of funds, like you have USDA for telemedicine and health. You have the Department of Education providing grants to schools. You have the library department. We need to look at all avenues and see if we can't put a matrix and then slot what we're trying to do.
Very much agree that that would be possible. And by the way, to that point of a matrix, when we were talking with the other groups that we've met with about putting together a demonstration project, a pilot project, that both illustrates the infrastructure play and also illustrates the application play for e-learning and e-health and economic development. What came out of that was the need to create a decision matrix, a scoring mechanism, and Mike Keeling has volunteered to share one that he's developed, a spreadsheet that allows us to say, you know, if we're going to try to pick one or two specific areas in the state to do this demonstration, there's several physical criteria, economic criteria, application criteria that would drive the decision about where to actually do those demonstrations. And again, the belief came out in this earlier conversation that to the extent that we can have a very concrete proposal to present to legislators, that's much more likely to drive something actually happening out of the legislature. And you might have a better idea, Senator Burns, than I do, because I've never done any of that before.
Clearer the picture, the better.
Yeah. Yes?
Mike,
yes.
This is Steve down in Tucson.
Hi, Steve.
Mike, have we got anything yet? You know, I'm all for the conduit thing, but my question is, have we looked at looked at the mapping data that we have and any other data that we have that shows communities in need, and what plans for highway development there is to those communities over the next few years? I mean, it's great to be able to say we're going to put conduit in, but unless we're going to go out and actually put in the conduit without any road construction, those are two different issues. If you're talking road construction and laying conduit at the time the road construction is taking place, is one cost issue. If you're talking about just going out and laying conduit, there's a whole different issue.
Steve,
so my question is, do we have any information from the state, from the feds, from local communities that are planning to do road construction to those communities in need over the next few years?
Yes, but you may have a misunderstanding too. In the draft, 2 highways for the price of 1 bill, we have said that to the extent that construction is happening fortuitously in a particular area that we want to target with conduit, that's great because it just lowers the cost for that particular road segment. But where there is no construction going on, the highway department has agreed, and we believe that this broadband coordination office would agree that it'll get driven by identifying a community that can be a solid demonstration that is along a roadway where, for the demonstration level, where it's within a shooting distance of some significant backhaul capacity, so that when the conduit and the fiber is put in along that road, it can be connected to a major source of backhaul capacity. That's an important piece of the physical solution. And then it also has to have 2 or 3 or 4 communities within 20 miles of that roadway that can be reached by these point-to-point microwave connections off the cell towers along the road. So, and a key part of, and that's part of what this scoring matrix will get used for, is to try to identify 2 or 3 road segments that have unserved or underserved communities within reach of those roads by microwave, where the demonstration of the power of the entire model will be made clear.
And then that same grading can evolve to a broader program.
Yes.
To Steve, to your point, there would then be a evolving matrix for evaluating more meta or global opportunities across the state.
Yeah. Now, 2 interesting candidates have already emerged. One of them would be to, Casa Grande is already part of an economic development region, for the whole Sun Corridor thing. And so we were thinking that possibly, now we have to do some research on this, that if we took a highway that exits, and Casa Grande already has reasonable broadband capacity, but if we could find 2 or 3 communities along the roads that exit Casa Grande that are underserved, and we can demonstrate that they're underserved, and then we can connect a stretch of conduit and fiber from the Casa Grande location along the road that could then serve by microwave these 2 or 3 or 4 other communities, that might prove to be an interesting area to do a demonstration in, both because it's already an economic development target, and secondly, it might have the necessary physical and kind of geographic characteristics that are necessary. And then the remaining part that would need to be done, if, for example, we picked a set of communities like that, do they have schools that are currently underserved with bandwidth? Do they have urgent care facilities or health care facilities that are underserved? Do they have nursing homes that are underserved? Do they have libraries that are underserved with bandwidth? And so that's where these application models and then physical infrastructure models kind of need to blend together to arrive at this would be the best place to do a demonstration. And then there's another one that was proposed by, I'm going to say the name wrong, what is it?
Tayasan?
Tayento.
It's the Grand, it's up
Tusayan?
around the Grand
Tusayan.
Canyon.
Tusayan.
Tusayan, that's it, up around the Grand Canyon area. And there was an advocate here from that area who is very, very hot to get significant bandwidth delivered in that particular rural area. But the idea of having a northern demonstration and a southern demonstration, may be an interesting thing to pursue. But none of that's resolved, none of that's decided. That's part of the work of these various task groups and part of your work as well. And of course, the economic development component, which is what this group is focusing on, is what I'd like to start seeing coming out of this group is what does that look like as it relates to broadband capacity? How do we do something that clearly shows the world that real, genuine economic development happened because this infrastructure got put in place and the applications got put in place on top of the infrastructure. So,
Well, I guess also, how does it differ from the other groups?
yes, and what distinguishes specifically the economic development from the e-learning and e-health applications as well. Right.
Well, hey, Mike and Bill, I've got a question. This is Mike Whipple. My intuition is telling me that this is probably going to exclude thought of collaboration with the Arizona Small Business Administration and those rural communities for which they got a grant. Does that pretty much sound like what's going to happen?
I don't think so.
Why would that be the case?
Well, I just, like I say, it's just intuition. Like just looking at the communities they were targeting, it's like they're probably not going to fit into the decision matrix. I'm just guessing that they're probably not going to have a lot of qualities that match up for what we would desire in a pilot project.
Because the communities would be too large or too small, or what's the reason you're thinking?
Yeah, too small, too scattered, not on the right highway and such.
I don't know that that's going
not
to
been
be
defined.
universally the case. It probably case by case basis, Mike.
But that's yet another thing to take into the scoring matrix. If we can identify communities that do qualify, for that kind of support, that's all to the good.
Or have specific business profiles that would be bandwidth centric in where if they were logistics centers or e-commerce or telework, there might be community employment characteristics that would.
So one other topic, and then I'm going to kind of shut up and let you guys begin the conversation. Did you have a?
Well, I guess I need to hear your other topic, then I got some things to say.
Well, my other topic is many people may not know that as the staff of a state agency, we are not allowed to lobby in any direct sense the legislature. In fact, I think we can go to jail if we do that. So we don't intend to go to jail. So one of the
Because there's no bandwidth there.
That's why I don't want to go. My iPhone won't work there.
Yeah, Mike also said that he didn't like the color orange.
Right. So
Lawrence, is it pretty this time?
yeah. So basically, the lobbying effort, to the extent there is one, are going to need to be council members and task group members who come together and hopefully tell a coherent story to the legislators that might be willing to support some kind of a funding mechanism for this, and not just the funding, but also support the whole redefinition of what a highway is to include the transport of information as well as the transport of good services and people, so that we can open up rights of way that are already there but we don't have access to today, and things like the creation of this broadband coordination office to deal with the accelerating and simplifying and lowering the cost of permitting and easements. So that story hopefully can be boiled down through the various group work to a set of reasonably coherent talking points that can be delivered kind of consistently to the legislature, and hopefully we can get them on board. If not this legislative cycle, hopefully certainly by the next one, but we would love to get at least pieces of this done this legislative cycle if we can. So,
Okay, can I ask a couple of questions? I've got more than one question.
Okay, go. This is your meeting at this point, so.
No.
The group.
No.
It's the group's meeting.
Thank you. The project demonstration, and maybe Mr. Burns can help elaborate on this too. Do we have enough time to make a coherent presentation to the legislators? They're going to be meeting in a month and a half from now.
Yeah. One of the reasons the other groups are having meetings scheduled fairly close to one another, on the heels of one another, so there's like several of them have a meeting the week after Thanksgiving, is we recognize that we're running out of time to get something to happen. And so there's a fair amount of people are committing a significant amount of work to trying to get, for instance, the draft legislation really codified and coherent and agreed to within the next, by the first week of December. And such that we can begin to start to try to find some sponsorship and some other people to be able to carry it through.
But Mike, we wouldn't have to define the specific target communities, just in concept approve that there would be a pilot or multiple pilots without.
As I understand
what you're
it,
saying?
and Senator Burns, you probably can clarify, you can put kind of draft bills in the hopper and then come back and modify them for a period of time before it really gets to get into serious debate in the legislature about whether the...
Right. You can have a folder opened on legislation, and then that folder can be changed a number of times before it actually becomes a bill.
Right.
At the point it becomes a bill, then it gets assigned, and then it has to go through committee and so on.
What's the time frame in which it becomes a bill? What period of calendar time does that happen in?
Well, I think early in February is the deadline for introduction of bills.
Okay.
Right, but the session would run at least 100 days until April, May, June, depending on.
But what we're talking about.
What you need is, if you're going to have a bill to work a bill, you need to have it done early in the session. I believe it's early in February. I don't remember the date.
Well, I think if we put forth the concept so that they know what the concept is, we can then go from that point.
Flesh it out.
Well, if you open a folder, then you're going to have Ledge Council drafting language that is off your blueprint or whatever you present to them, your outline. They will draft language. Then you can look at the language and start looking and seeing whether or not it's going to work, and if it doesn't, you can still modify it in the folder.
Right. So that's an iterative process with Ledge Council. They take a whack at your language, and then you can come back and say, well, that doesn't quite do it.
Right.
We'd like it like this, and you go back and forth for some period of time. And that process, I'm kind of hearing, needs to be completed by the end of the year, it sounds like. Is that?
Well, I don't know. I think if the sponsor's willing to have a little bit later introduction, which can create a problem. I mean, you want to get your introductions up fairly early so that the assignments can be made to the committees, so that you know who you're lobbying, because you're going to have to start with the committee first.
Right.
And so you don't want to let bills that get introduced at the deadline a lot of times don't make it because they just don't get in the cycle quick enough. And this is going to be a pretty big sales pitch.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy to get everybody to understand exactly what you're trying to do. So the sooner you can get it done, I think the better. But again, you want to have a product that's in pretty good shape when you turn it loose. Otherwise, you end up spending all your time.
Things. We always have
trying to fix it.
But I still don't know that the final bill would need to name the pilot communities. The two anticipated
bills. You could describe
bills,
the model for the demonstration.
Yeah, the model and what the criteria is.
Right, the model, the criteria, the funding sources, but wouldn't have to name the communities specifically.
Well, that's fine. If you do put together a good, solid plan and you do present it, say, towards the end of the year in January. In the first part of February will be the legislative luncheon on the lawn, and you should have a key point person or persons that attend that so that you can get your message out.
Whose legislative luncheon? There's about 80 of them.
This would be the AAED,
Okay.
Arizona Association.
Because the Tech Council has one. A lot of people have them. Didn't know which one you meant.
That's the one I mean. This one would probably give you the biggest clout. They
What
usually
were
have.
what did the letters stand for? The
Arizona Association of Economic Developers.
Okay.
Back to the criteria, I was doing some thinking about this, and I'd like to open it up for discussion. I did look at the Sun Corridor, and I do disagree with Michael Crow. I think he forgot one large community, and that's Flagstaff, Arizona, for being part of the Sun Corridor. That's the only exception you can take to it. I think it would be good for economic development. You were talking about small communities within the artery. You have Eloy, you have Florence, you have Coolidge. Those would be some, Eloy actually is doing pretty well right now. So you may...
Broadband-wise, you mean?
They may, I mean, economic development-wise, they have employers, they have land, they used to have a very, very high tax rate, but even that, they're doing some whittling on that. The other thing you can look at are going back to those COGS, as we talked about, and you could look at unemployment. And that was a little different if you're looking for barometers, because Yuma is going to pop right out at you at 25% unemployment. So, but you have to look at the different things, and I think it's important that we as a team put together some form of a matrix and a scoring sheet, of which I did, and you can pass that around and take a gander at it, and then collaborate with whoever else is putting together a scoring sheet, and make
where the overlaps are.
that we overlay.
Yeah.
Exactly, because there's a lot of things in there that, as Deborah and I were talking, you can look at a small community that has no infrastructure, and you say, okay, they're a great target. Say they have a population of 1,000, but let's say it's only $100,000 to get the middle mile to connect to the last mile and all that other gobbledygook stuff. But their population is 60 years of age, and a total population of 1,000. It either tells you that they're beyond being employed, or they're currently employed, and you say it's not going to do any good. You can put infrastructure in there, broadband in there. It's not going to serve anybody.
They just get
But
set
Bill,
around
there
one.
you get into the medical aspects of it. You get into the older population.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that, okay, but that's going to be more on a regional basis. And that's the other thing, and that gets back into what we've been discussing. These can't be communities. I think you're going to get the bang for the buck if you regionalize it. Certainly with every grant, every funding opportunity I've seen is regional.
Right.
And you just can't focus on one community. It's
No,
gonna-
that's why I was saying 3 or 4.
No, but it's a string
The
of
pilots
communities
would be
along-
where you could.
along-
Yeah, and
You
to
could
use
get
your
a
example,
cluster.
Mike, Eloy, Coolidge, Florence,
Yeah,
that would be
yeah.
your stream, okay?
Right.
Within the Sun Corridor. If you were to go up north, it'd be Prescott, it would be Prescott Valley, and it goes all the way over to Seligman.
Right.
Kind of a weird situation, but
Yeah, I've driven
maybe-
through Seligman.
Yeah, but that's where the pop is. So I mean, you have to kind of look at all these different things and say, okay, what's the actual cost, which is where Mark was coming from too, and what are the funding resources? Anyway, that's my spiel for today.
And to further complicate that, I agree with everything you just said. To further complicate it, the providers who have to be an intimate part of making this happen, because they're the ones who are actually going to go to the cost of putting the fiber in and lighting it up and putting the microwave towers up and all that kind of stuff. It needs to be within their strategic map as well, as a place that they would like to reach to next, which
absolutely.
they're now not serving.
Yeah, it's on there too. It's on
Yeah,
that too.
yeah.
Mike, this is Steve. I've got a couple of quick things. One is, I think we really need to have a conversation with ASDA ASAP, because they're going to start rolling out that project in January. They've got USDA funding, and if we're thinking that USDA funding may be one of the possible funding sources for us, I would think that it would enhance any application to say that we're piggybacking on some funding that they've already provided. So I think we need to have a conversation. I know, Bill, you talked briefly with Mana, and she gave you a name of somebody on her staff but I think we really need to have a conversation with them quickly.
Yeah.
Second thing is,
Hold on,
Morris, or
wait, Steve.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me just break up for just a moment. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did have a conversation with Donna Davis, and we are to set up a meeting with her.
Good.
I think that
Steve, while you're interrupted, let me just add something to that too. I would hope that this group would, through your multiple contacts, would feel absolutely comfortable, and all the other groups too for that matter, reaching out to other organizations who can bring something to the party. So, and having those conversations, you don't need to wait for approval from Asset to do that. You know, just begin to start to talk to other powers that be that could help this process in some way or another, just to find out if they're open to it. So, for instance, just as an example, in the healthcare group discussion, I mean, Alan Pitt is all over my case and Aaron's case to meet with high-level people at Access in order to find out whether or not they'll fund telehealth components of a demonstration as a test of funding telehealth in general. And I use that as an example because it's different than economic development, but that's the kind of power, is to start to bring these other people, you know, into this conversation to help move things forward. So sorry for the continued interruption, Steve.
No problem. So the other question that I have, and Horace, maybe you or Mark or have any idea about the remnants of the I-19 corridor demonstration that we did, what the status is of that? Is there anything?
Dead as a doornail.
Dead on delivery.
Dead and gone.
Because?
So there isn't anything that we could build on?
Yeah, one could.
What we were talking
Slight possibilities.
So is there anything we can build on that at all, or it's long gone?
Slight possibility that one could step in to the negotiated rights of way and pay something for the mounted Wi-Fi equipment if it hasn't been dismounted. I'd put a very slim hope on that, Steve.
I put a slim hope, this is Horace, I put a slim hope on that, but we did manage to make contact with a number of municipal organizations.
Absolutely.
Including Green Valley, Rio Rico,
Tubac,
in a number of other communities that we might be able to build upon.
Absolutely.
So as far as the physical structure, definitely nothing. I don't think there's anything.
But there was still an engineering design that gave you mobile Wi-Fi along the highway that did secure vertical rights for deployment, and one could slide back into that shoe.
True.
But
With
probably
a
not.
different model, right.
Probably not with the previous assets, but the design. The design is done, and the vertical asset accessibility is eased by prior use.
Who controls that now?
Well, and part of my question is that
Tucson Electric Power, ADOT, other right-of-way owners along that 30-mile stretch. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
I was just going to say that if there's anything that, you know, we can pick up off of that project, because again, Nogales is one of the communities, and I think is the first community that ASBA is going to be targeting. So again, I don't know if there's any...
That entire project stopped 8 miles north. The project stopped by design because of the international and federal complications 8 miles from Nogales. It never went there, but it's still the immediate corridor outside the Nogales sphere of influence.
Yeah, what Steve is mentioning though is that the Arizona Small Business Association with USDA funds is targeting Nogales
Sure.
as one of the.
So Steve, it's not a bad thought, but it's not a high probability pathway, but maybe something. But Mike, on another point though, I think, and it was Bill's mention of Flagstaff that really brought this to mind. The primary highway corridor for right-of-way use and long-haul fiber is not through Phoenix. It's mostly through Flagstaff on I-40, and to a smaller extent through Tucson. Almost all bandwidth for Phoenix comes through Flagstaff or through Tucson. The I-40 corridor is fiber-rich, but termination poor.
Yeah, exactly.
And so one possibility that we really haven't been talking about is something that would place a shelter or a meet-me room and encourage or incent the long-haul providers to break out a strand or two and serve where fiber is already present.
Yeah, that's what I understand is that this national fiber passes through these areas.
The Lambda rail.
Yeah, but there's no termination points, as you said.
Generally, yes. And so, but that's still a modification of our strategy that might be fruitful to explore.
Yeah. So let me make one kind of broad point, though. The thing that will kill this is if we try to boil the ocean. So the hardest work that this task group and the other task groups have to do is the narrowing down to a single 1 or 2 geographic focuses, 1 or 2 specific set of communities, to your point about it needs to be a region, and then how are those applications that are being proposed by the other task groups going to actually land on top of that infrastructure as well. So that's not easy to take all of the possibilities and filter through them and screen them and rank them and then finally figure out with a specific, a very specific, very concrete thing that we can do.
Though I think the consideration of existing fiber and adding breakout is a potential faster time to market.
I do too. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that along, most of that is along the BNSF line, Mark? Is that true?
No. Those lines tend to be in the south, not the north. Most of the fiber in the state is going along I-40.
I know,
BNSF
goes along I-40.
Oh, okay. Then I don't know specifically.
No, they had right of way to go in and tear up along the road bed.
Right.
The railroad bed, not the road bed.
Okay. We have an active BNSF contact and Union Pacific contact from our right-of-way study, but that's not a question we specifically explored.
Good. Next. Where do you guys want to take this conversation?
Well, I'd like to see us collaborate with these other task groups, because otherwise I think we're going to get tied up in our shorts, and then one group's going to get ahead of the other group, and we're not going to know what all's going on. So whatever you can do to help
Bill,
facilitate
there are minutes being put together by the various groups and will be circulated.
And cross-member fertilization.
Well, I haven't been fertilized on any of them yet. So that's why I'm bringing it to your attention.
Bill, we're video recording every task group meeting.
All right.
And each of those recordings within a week or less will be available on the ArizonaBroadband.gov website. So you can go skim through them, stop, listen, do all that kind of stuff to get a flavor of what they're each doing.
But to your point, at some point there needs to be a tactical way to pull people from each group together, and a group of 35 won't do it. I mean, it needs to be representative folks, maybe some of the cross-pollinators, if you will, participate, but a group about this size is about as big as you can get.
So each group probably needs to pick a representative or two.
I think that's what I was trying to get.
Exactly. The council member who sits on the task group, and I'm not trying to just single out one, but since he's on the council, to me it would make sense that he would carry forward the information from the task group to the council, so there's continuity.
I would say yes, as staff input. I would say yes, but I wouldn't limit it to that, just because of bodies. I think it takes more than 3 people to get that kind of.
Another thing that's worked, since everyone's time is very valuable and it's hard to schedule these meetings, it's even hard to schedule these meetings. And Alan Pitt, once again, kind of led the way on this with his healthcare group, was he wrote up a 2-page kind of summary as he understood it. And did you participate with him in writing that? Anyway, he sent out this very succinct description of what he thought the issues were that needed to be dealt with at large that came out of the health group meeting. That kind of a document, it can get produced by someone in each one of these task groups and then circulated amongst all the task groups, I think is a very good way of cross-fertilizing some of the information too. And it may provoke conversations, additional conversations that need to be had in the different task groups. I hope it would, as a matter of fact. Trying to do it with a meeting, I think, is, unless people can figure out how to do that, is going to be difficult.
Now, I haven't seen Alan's, but I did see Ted and Brad's, and they did a summary, I thought they did an okay job of just trying to put together some high points.
Or maybe I'm confused. Maybe it was Ted Craver's piece. It was Ted Craver's piece. Sorry, I misspoke.
But the
Ted did a great job of kind of outlining a process
He did.
that we definitely should circulate, because I know he's going to be meeting again, and then the education group's going to be meeting again. But I'd like to suggest a couple of things. One is that, and maybe this is the charge for this committee as the outreach committee, is to take the data that we have, the maps, and whatever other data that we have, and to have a clear, a summary document that says these are the communities that we know are in need. These are the communities that do not have a middle mile at this point. And from there, at least that will give us a starting place of looking at which communities. The second piece of that is that we need to look at which communities, and this where outreach comes in, and perhaps where the proposal that's still what you guys are still evaluating in terms of outreach, of who is going to go out to those communities, contact them, see if they're interested, and help facilitate them getting together and getting a plan done. And so, but it seems to me that the first step that crosses over all of these groups is which communities are in need at this point in time, what their status is, and if we can get that in some kind of a summary manner, maybe that already exists, and share that with all the groups. And
Steve, big caveat, nothing we have done has really moved forward our capture and mapping, or little we have done of middle mile. We have last mile community service information, but middle mile has not advanced much.
New data though, Mark, in the meeting this morning, CenturyLink has agreed to provide us with all of their middle mile fiber maps, and as has Cable One. So, and we hope to extend that to get Cox to participate and the other members to participate. So for the first time, we're going to actually have real visibility to where there is capacity and where there is not. Again, another huge win that we've never experienced before.
But Steve, that's going to be a building scenario and can't be predicate to the other activities, I would say, despite the most recent breakthrough as of this morning.
Well, again, I've said this to a couple of folks on the phone. This is a shotgun start. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in parallel, and almost by virtue of that, you're going to get overlap. And this is to figure out where the ground is for each one of the groups, and then how do the groups work together to come sort of cohesive plan. One, for the pilot, and two, frankly, as the communication or sell job, if you will, to the legislature, to make sure that they're on board with what we're doing. Because if both of those don't come together at the same time, we've just delayed it a year.
So a certain level of chaos is to be expected as we begin, but hopefully we're able to get beyond the chaos when we start to try to actually tell the story, for the legislature.
Let me ask you, if, for example, a folder were opened right away, with what we have, and Ledge Council could go through and draft language based on that, and then it would come back for review, would that help create a focus, do you think?
I think it would. I think that's a good idea. In fact, I think it's a very good idea.
I agree. That's a very good idea.
Yeah.
Well, I think I can get some folders going.
Good. Okay. So probably the best person to work with is Mike Keeling, who from the asset side is actually kind of managing and moving forward the draft language that we're doing. But of course, we want to make sure that that draft language is not just something cooked up, in the dark by asset staff, but it actually reflects, what the council and the community,
what the consensus is.
Yeah, what the consensus is.
And there is a working session Thursday from the policy, right-of-way, and economic
education
and policy, right-of-way, and best practices task group on exactly reworking those drafts.
That's the task group that is most directly responsible for the legislative language and stuff.
Right. Well, who can I get a check off from as far as having some language that would be ready for a starter?
Start with Mike Keeling. And yeah, and so Mike, will you contact Senator Burns and work out how to do that logistically?
He's not on the phone.
Yes, I will. In fact, what I'll do right now, Senator Burns, is to email you those most recent drafts.
Okay, good. And then if Mike, since you're on the legislative task group too, if you can keep Senator Burns current with any changes in consensus or thoughts or ideas that might modify what you're going to initially send him, please do that as well. We already know, for instance, that ADOT wanted very specific language changes where the original draft said things like the director shall be responsible, the ADOT director shall be responsible for certain things. They didn't want that hard language. They wanted that softened. I think Mike knows what needs to be changed to reflect that. The governor's office did not want us to call the broadband infrastructure coordination effort an authority. Too many authorities, so we're calling it an office. We think that's a softer term that will operate out of ADOA. So, Mike, if you can either make notes to the existing language and send it to Senator Burns, or actually just make the changes and send it to him, that would be great.
Yeah, Mike, I think we also want to send Alan Pitt's commentary along to Senator
Yes,
Burns.
and Ted Craver's needs to be circulated as well from the e-learning task group too. So we'll try to get you as much the actual stuff and then some background information around it as well.
Somebody needs to tell me when to pull the trigger. When do I go down and
Guys, from a structural point of view, does this need to go to the council before it goes?
Does the council need to bless that before we open those folders? I don't know.
At least be aware of it. Come on, yeah.
I think what we maybe should do as a courtesy and good form is send an email to all the council members that say we are about to do this. If there are any naysayers, please let us know now. Otherwise, we're going to proceed and open a folder.
And that the opportunity will exist for additional modification during the session.
Yeah, what goes into this folder is not in concrete.
The council has seen, they've had the draft. The council has got the draft, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay, well,
So we want to make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves in terms of keeping people enlisted and enrolled and informed. So, but between Mike Keeling and me, we'll coordinate that and get it to you as rapidly as we possibly can.
Okay.
Good, and we really appreciate you taking that over.
Thank you.
Mike Keeling, this is Jeff Crane. Would you like me to add you to this task group as well?
Yes, please.
All 6 of them?
Now, did you want a time when you were going to sleep and see your wife?
Who?
Next year, is that it?
Yeah, it sounds like sometime kind of end of January you might be able to do that.
99, is that it?
Well, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Yes.
Good. So, other things, anything people want to bring up? Actions that you see need to be done?
Yeah, this is Steve again. So here's another thought. Many of you have were involved in the discussion, the often painful discussion with ATIC about the development of a broadband stakeholder group, committee, or whatever we wanted to call it. And I think we still need to pursue that and to try to provide a forum for all the different folks who are interested or providers of broadband, a forum to get together and to share information. And particularly, that will also help to identify where people can collaborate together and what their needs are. So, for example, you've got the universities, you've got community colleges, you've got K-12, you've got all these different people. Many of them are trying to or interested in serving communities, and they either don't have the bandwidth or the services to be able to do that, and providing an opportunity for them to identify what their needs are and how they can collaborate together. Perhaps, now obviously times have changed and they don't have the money that they used to, but the universities, for example, have invested in infrastructure in the past, and so have other groups, and so it would be helpful to know what they have, what their plans are, and is there ways for them to collaborate in serving particular communities, and will also help us in trying to write grants and find funding sources in those communities.
I think I agree with you, Steve. I think it's still very valuable to do that. And a couple of comments about it as well. We're getting lots of feedback from various university-related people who say they want to actively participate in this. The Internet 2 folks want to make sure that their resources get interconnected into this network as it expands. And I think there's many other possibilities for that particular cluster. I also think it's important, if you're going to do this stakeholder thing, that the meetings for it get often held outside of Phoenix Metro and in other parts of the state, where people won't drive to Phoenix to participate, but they will go to some regional location like Prescott or Flagstaff or Yuma or Tucson, where whatever. And because I think it's important that there's an information delivery aspect to what you're talking about, Steve, too. It's not just about finding out what they want, but it's also just telling them what's happening. What are we doing? Getting them on board with the initiative. The high schools.
Steve, this is Ralph. I think our focus has to be on the goals of this task group right now. And once we have congealed all of how we're going to approach it, then it's the time to do an outreach to the other communities as we had proposed with ATIC.
I believe that's true on behalf of ABDC. However, I would contend that ATIC will have its own path, and Galen had specifically identified a funding stream he thought could be allocated from the NTIA grant of, I believe he mentioned, $14,000 a year that could pass to ATIC under certain conditions and oversight, but essentially for that function.
Yeah, and we still, under the federal grant, we still have the responsibility to deliver on this community outreach thing. And so, in a sense, there's kind of two parallel paths. There's communication about what's possible with broadband and what communities could do to aggregate demand and those kinds of things that are independent of whatever demonstration we're trying to do out of the council. I mean, in other words, there's a broader audience than just what we will be able to focus down on to do a demonstration to get buy-in to implement the statewide plan. So I see those two things going on in parallel. I think they're complementary.
Well, I see myself getting confused now, because I thought when ASA put out the RFP with the outreach, I thought that's what we were supposed to be doing.
It is.
Okay, and now I've heard what Galen has said about the I guess.
So let me try to.
No, let me finish, Mark, please. Okay. I think the stakeholders is keenly important. I think where you're going to have clout with stakeholders is under the ABDC umbrella, whether it be ATIC or what have you, but I think it's keenly important that the umbrella is the Arizona Broadband Development Council, because that's where the clout is.
Sure, there's in a sense an authority there.
And you get the stakeholders together and they endorse it's a two-way street, like you say. You understand their requirements, but they'll also understand what your delivery happens to be.
Right.
And then you can. With any of these luncheons, Mark, then you can bring your stakeholders in, and they become your lobbyists.
Yes.
Then you've got power, and that's palatable to these lawmakers.
Well said.
Okay. So I'm in total concurrence with it. I got to admit, I get a little confused. And Mark, no, it's not directed towards you. It's directed towards Galen, I guess. I hear all these stories about money, and I don't believe any of it until I see it.
Well, let me suggest that, I guess the question, and this goes back just to what Bill was saying, we actually delayed moving ahead with that stakeholder group for a couple of reasons. One was ATIC, who's doing some of our own strategic planning, but also we wanted to be clear about, in particular, this task force of outreach. And so the question becomes, one is, do we need to do that stakeholder group? And then secondly, is where does it get done? Is it done under ATIC, under ATII, under ABDC? Who's going to take on that leadership role? And where does the funding come from to make that happen? And so I think that, to me, the first question is, do we still want to pursue it? Secondly is, where should that take place? If ATIC is going to do it, that's fine. Then we need to figure out how to make that happen.
Has SPO actually published the results of the thing?
The last I heard was November 11th. Everything was supposed to start the scoring, and I think by December The first week in December,
Yeah.
we were supposed to hear.
I still don't know what the outcome of that scoring is, because I've been kept out of that intentionally.
No, nothing has been communicated to the bidders, at least not ATII,
Okay.
in a formal sense.
But to your point about is there money, I don't know what organization will be selected by that bidding process, but some organization is going to get the money that Galen's been talking about, with the purpose of using that money to support the kinds of outreach that you're talking about.
Well, that's where I get confused again, because that particular
May
project.
I attempt some discrimination between the two things? To my understanding, both the RFP and ATII's design, which preceded the RFP but was consistent with the NTIA grant, was community grant specific, where you had communities that had some grassroots developing or developed core that wanted to do any of three things: prepare a grant, E-rate, those kinds of things, do a technical design, say for an off-ramp or a wireless deployment, or bring the community together in a strategic, focused way to plan. Those would be very specific community or sub-region grants that would be managed by the recipient of this RFP.
So an example of one of those would be like the Pine Top Lakeside thing that Kelly Udall, who's on the phone, began doing before that.
However, the broader ATIC history in telecom summits, roundtables, and strategic convening is a little more global. It's not specific community focused. It's at the statewide stakeholder level in some, bringing together the e-health community or bringing together, and that is not a fundamental definition of the RFP's work. That is something that I believe is, if not reserved for ATIC, appropriate for ATIC, and what Galen's separately identified flow of money was to support things that were more meta and global, not individual community focused like the grants.
And that's the other piece of what he's talking to you about. Now,
Does that
the
help, Bill?
magic that I heard.
Let me get back to Steve's question. Okay, Steve's question was, we want to do outreach and we want to know where the funding comes from. I thought whoever gets awarded with the ASET grant, okay, with that's what their purpose was. I thought that's why we responded.
The purpose is to manage that outreach effort.
Exactly. Right. So, Steve, to answer your question, you get a grand total of $19,200 a year to do it for 3 years. But you're not going to go very far with that amount of money. No. So that's where we get back into some of the other things that are available, and that's with the other $300,000 or whatever it was that you get the communities or the regions to endorse what you're trying to do, and then there could be supplemental money to help them continue on with the project.
And then the expectation is that other money will come from completely other sources as well besides the asset grant.
And the $14,000, I heard it before.
Well, it's all right if you don't believe it. I'm just trying to discriminate.
I'll believe it.
I'm just trying to discriminate what I believe are two different.
The thing that I heard that was music to my ears was in this outreach process, you create a cadre of lobbyists.
Well, I did say that.
I still think there's a differentiation of purpose between ATIC's communication plans, formative communication plans that return more to the roundtables and summits that we've held in the past that are broader, and the more community-focused grants that the RFP, the current RFP, is intended to stimulate.
Mark, I totally agree with that, Mark. It's not the process. It's the money. It's the funding of it.
Since we have some new people to the table, perhaps maybe a definition of what ATIC needs to be, because I know the gentleman sitting here.
Yeah, all these acronyms.
And this gentleman over here.
Horace is confused.
No, he's not.
He has his head down.
You might want to just.
He never gets
confused. What you're saying is I look confused.
If I may, Mr.
I apologize. I need to leave. So.
I was simply going to give the slightest of historical perspectives on ATIC and the more recent advent of ATII.
I think that will be useful, and since I've heard that, I will depart before you do. thank you all for participating. I'm sorry I have to bail out on you, but I'm
I'll get even.
anxious to see what kind of a work product you guys all produce.
We are too.
Yeah, we are too.
We got through.
Great, thank you.
Why don't we hear from Brian and David before we,
I don't care what sequence. Ralph called a
Well,
question.
I'd like to hear your summation first, if I could.
Certainly.
go ahead.
Okay. Going back to the late 80s, there was something called the Arizona Strategic Partnership for Economic Development. In the early 90s, and Stanford Research Institute was brought in at significant cost to help do the underlying strategic work for this, based on Michael Porter's work about economic development being based on industry clusters, where you didn't just have a semiconductor manufacturers, you had the whole supply chain, the consultants to them, the accountants, the suppliers, the customers. You had an ecosystem in each industry, and they were at that time called clusters, not ecosystems. So Arizona committed to a process to develop, at that point, 9 or 10 industry clusters: agriculture, mining, and these had to be areas where you export as a state, not where you simply consume your own dog food, but you're a net producer, outbound producer to form a cluster. Out of that is Governor Symington in the early 90s adopted that formally, and it became the Governor's Strategic Partnership for Economic Development. And again, it had 9 or 10 clusters, but it also had foundations which were seen as the web or fabric that underlied and nurtured the ability for there to be exporting industry clusters. Human resources was one, roads and infrastructure was one, telecommunications, I don't even know that we had the word broadband in mind back then. Telecommunications was a foundation under G-Speed. It had an earlier name, AICI, which Oris may recall what that even means. Arizona.
Advanced Infrastructure for Communications and Information. Something like that.
In the 1994-95 legislative session, the legislature created the office to the governor's staff of a telecom policy officer, and also authorized a universal service study for a state universal service study, and specifically chartered ACII, which then became known as ATIC, with a role relative to the Department of Commerce and the executive branch.
And ATIC stands for Arizona Telecommunications and Information Council.
So that dates back to 95, but it's preceded by AICI to 89 or 90. So ATIC has been around now arguably 22 years or 17 years under the current name. It's a broad stakeholder group. So unlike a telecom industry association, it has telecom industry players. It has consumer advocates, RUCO and the Arizona Consumers Council. It has large customers. It has regulators. It has a whole panoply of players that are interested in that. We've operated arguably 17 years with a mission of trying to promote broadband and broadband applications, telecom and information, broadband and applications. So Gazelle exists today, the e-learning association, because it started out as an application-focused committee under ATIC. So ATIC, without belaboring it, has spent 17 or 22 years trying to be a convening place for the interest in both broadband and broadband applications, has partnered well with others. We just had our third telehealth symposium with AZ Bio and Arizona Telemedicine. We're having our meeting with Arizona InfraGuard on cybersecurity this week.
Emphasize the 4 that we put together, because I think that's keenly important.
Sure, we have 4 annual public meetings. February, we do a state high-tech policy overview. Usually have people from Commerce, the Technology Council, and other entities. In May, we do an advanced visions of technology and have broadband providers come in and tell us their latest and greatest. what they're deploying now or will in the future. In the fall, early fall, we have a telehealth symposium. In the late fall, we have a cybersecurity one, and then we partner on an ongoing basis with Gazelle on their e-learning initiatives and meetings. We don't have our own separate one. About 2 years ago, we decided that project-based and big grant-based work didn't necessarily have its best home under ATIC, a 501c3. Six. Thank you. I always get a little confused. C6. Many philanthropy groups prefer a C3 for various reasons, and we didn't think the structure was optimum. We took, in Wall Street vernacular, we took over the shell of an existing nonprofit that had been several things over the years under Ted Craver's ownership, and we made it the Arizona Telecom and Information Institute, institute being a key word in avoiding the word foundation, with in itself carries some baggage. That group brought the 3 universities together and TGen in Phoenix for a $2 million NSF grant 2 summers ago, and that was kind of our core consolidating and coalescing activity. We failed to get that grant, but actually the connection we were trying for the first leg of it between TGen and ASU happened anyway, in part as the sand and the pearl that we played a role in. So ATII is now, its mission is very similar to ATIC's, but a little different operating environment, the ability to seek larger grants and projects, but we really see it as some projects we might own, some we might partner in, and some we might simply influence or advise. And so there's like a continuum between owning projects and advising them, and in between it may be partnering. So this second opportunity has been applying for the current RFP that Asset has produced and SPO has issued, ADOA has issued, to manage several $100,000 from the NTIA grant in the way I described a little earlier, as community grants for telecom consulting at the technical level, community stakeholder building at the strategic level, or grant and E-rate writing. We're an applicant, and apparently one of 4 applicants for a contract to manage a few $100,000 of the NTIA grant. And we continue to be interested in other things. Brad Zerbe, wants to see if he can bring us some Lambda Rail to high school oriented. He's been working with Paradise Valley or other. We want to really see ATII, Arizona Telecom and Information Institute, as a platform that can glom on like the Space Lab, kind of pieces or modules over time. But it doesn't have much of an operating budget. It's going to be a project-oriented operation. So any questions about that history, 22-year history?
That's good. Okay. Well, why don't you, since you're talking about rural areas too, since you deal with that, why don't you comment?
Well, I apologize. I'm trying to catch up with this, and a lot of the acronyms throw me, but...
Understand.
And I realize this is an initial meeting, but my fundamental question is, how many last mile providers might be engaged already, and some, not necessarily this committee, but some of the other committees, and how much? I realize there's a short window here, maybe to produce something. But
so how many providers?
Last mile providers.
Last mile providers.
Yeah, last mile providers, because I think these are the people that are out there doing the metrics and the business models.
I believe on the base committee you have 7 or 8 direct representatives of providers out of 30 some odd committee members, and others in the room and on committees.
Because my bias is naturally to look at the more remote corners of the state and rural areas, even tribal areas, and
well, no,
what's represented.
The only challenge on doing a remote area for a pilot is it's got to be somewhere where it's attachable to high speed bandwidth, and that makes too far out being difficult in the pilot stage.
Yeah, I recognize that. I'm just thinking of who's out there right now that's involved in this process, that's actually serving those areas. might know some of those problems, because that's the information you want, I think, to telegraph back to the legislature.
Have you looked at the map? There is a map that has been generated showing who has what area and where the open things are.
And one of the more interesting maps, we're currently producing it for the fall data submittal, which happened in early to mid-October to the feds, we call heat maps. And there are 2 heat maps, one of which shows how many providers, non-satellite, because there's 3 satellite providers, but they just marginally considered broadband and they serve everywhere. So we tend to, I don't mean to discriminate, but when we talk about underserved, you know, and say a community has only 1 provider or 0 providers, we're discounting the 3 satellite providers. But there's a heat map that shows for every area of the state how many providers are active. It doesn't name them because that would be too busy, but you look at it in the core metro area of Phoenix and to a slightly less extent Tucson, there are 17 commercial residential broadband providers. And then you go out from there and you see it kind of fade down to 7, 3, 2, 1. Now you can go to the map and figure out who the 1 or the 3 are by clicking on Prescott or, you know, Havasupai, or, you know, but the heat map gives you some fair indication of the number of providers or the lack thereof.
Now, where is this heat map?
They're on the advanced version of the Arizona broadband map site.
And that would show you facilities-based providers.
It would show you, yes, it would show you facility-based providers to residences, but the fall version of that's the spring 2010 version. The fall version is probably still 2 weeks out, but can be distributed as a PDF. The other heat map shows the fastest advertised speed for any area. So where you have DOCSIS 3 cable modems, not to get too technical, you might see 50 megabit speeds. Where you only have a little community Wi-Fi WISP, you might see 1 to 3 megabit per second speeds. So, sorry, timeout.
To the underlying question, the map, Galen put together a map. It's somewhat dated, so there have been extensions to where you've got it. I don't think it's going to be undoing. And we brought it up with the last group. I'll go ahead and make the commitment to distribute it to this group as well as soon as we have a PDF of it, which will give you an idea of where the infrastructure, middle mile infrastructure is today, relative to today. CenturyLink in the last meeting for earlier conversation is going to give us an update to it, and as one of the bigger providers that will be helpful to us, although it's still not inclusive. The good news to your question is we do have commitments out of the group we just met that they're willing to play and be a partner in the pilot process. So if they happen to be, if they're selected in an area where they are capable of doing that final mile, once we provide the middle mile, they're willing to participate.
Now, CenturyLink is complemented by Frontier, who CenturyLink tried to sell off what rural areas they do have to a predecessor company of Frontier, and it never made it through the Corporation Commission. So when you're talking about ILECs who deliver broadband, you really have 2 that count, Frontier and CenturyLink. When you're talking about cable companies, there's more like 6 or 8 that cover NPG and Flagstaff, Kingman, and some other areas, you know, and several besides Cox.
Well, again, this will go back to the decision tree process of what applications do we have in an area, what is the demand in an area, how close are they to existing infrastructure, distance, and who's capable of delivering the final mile. If you have the perfect solution and nobody's willing to step up and do the final mile, we've got to go somewhere else. I mean, so I'm extrapolating to where you're going with it. But we've got to have each piece of that puzzle's got to fit together for all of it to work for a pilot.
Yeah, I can't tell you because I work predominantly in the mobile wireless arena, but what's going on in the wireless world now, that's what's pushing out to the most remote corners is people getting access to 3G, which is upgrading facilities. But with the universal service reform that everybody's excited about,
right.
There's the opportunity to eventually fund 4G wireless services. That's going to push out the middle mile to those areas because they're going to need that to get to those.
This is Mala, and I just wanted to add to your question about where the infrastructure already exists, and also to the outreach and funding question that Steve asked. We have a BTOP grant right now that we're working on. It's the BTOP, the second grant that we got to establish 28 job help hubs in our libraries. And these 28 job help hubs have already started functioning to do the training for job seekers and entrepreneurs. We are targeting our resources, like our computer time and our staff training time, to people who need those trainings. And we're reaching out again to the market in that area, to the society and community in that area. So if you are looking for outreach and marketing and funding to do that, we already are doing that. We have the funds that you can leverage to do what you're looking for. And this is exactly towards rural development and helping economic growth in that area.
And to the library communities.
Pardon me?
And to the library community's credit, they're also a provider of last resort by often having Wi-Fi available that bleeds beyond their building into their parking lot, and people who can't afford and can no longer afford or never had broadband connections of their own are seen on their way to work pulling into the library parking lots with their Dunkin' Donuts coffee and doing some email before they drive on. The libraries all can act as an anchor point for some of the least enabled.
Mala,
That's very true. That's very true, and also not only anyone in the community, even people in the police force, the fire department, anyone else who needs to report back urgently and don't have access, even if the library is not open, they can use the parking lot, as you just said, very rightly so.
Mala, can you send Jeff a list of where the VTOP recipients are?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll do that right now.
Because I think that would be useful to distribute back to this group so you can see where that is.
Right.
Right, right. I'll do that. I've got a little flyer that tells you what the project purpose is, what the grants will do, and what the libraries are doing. I'll send that to you.
Thank you, Mala, very much.
Not at all.
So it seems like there's also another piece to this puzzle, and that's, Eric, I believe you're working on anchor institutions.
Right.
So what is that, and where is that going, and how does that fit into this puzzle?
For the rest of the group, the anchor institutions, there's about 6,500 total statewide. They were identified as some form of public facility, and there's probably a better definition than that in the law somewhere. But essentially it's things like fire stations, schools, libraries, police departments, town councils, public institutions, all the 8
some of the parks and recreation facilities.
It's essentially anything that was built with public funds that has some sort of probable broadband presence. I mean, that may be overly general, but that's generally what a community anchor institution is defined as. And one of the things that you're going to see on the Arizona broadband map is who on those has some sort of Wi-Fi, some sort of broadband connection into that facility. Now, we don't yet today show what kind of capability it's got. We do have that data, it's just not on the map. But I think where Steve is asking the implied question is, has any analysis been done on that data? And the answer is no. We have lots of data, but no analysis right now. Could it be done? Certainly. There are probably multiple ways to approach it, whether you do it by form of density, where they're actually public facilities, as opposed to like a police department, which really isn't. There are ways to slice and dice the data. You probably want to get outside the urban areas because this is statewide, and I'm guessing if it's true to form, probably 85 to 90% are in one of the urban populated areas. So that would be something for somebody to be able to undertake. We don't have the capacity right now to do it ourselves. We've simply got the data.
But you do have a contractor, for example, that's working through those institutions and has maybe done 30% of them direct outreach and updated the records.
They're validating the data, but what we have not done is how do you aggregate the sum of the parts to know what an density is.
Yeah, that's another thing that we're going to have to do is start lobbying so that we can retain the staff that we have currently now in asset. So, because we're going to be losing some people at the end of the year. So this analysis that is needed is going to go away unless we seek.
Some is funded by the NTIA grant, which is a 5-year grant running
but we
through
need to make sure that
2014.
there is enough funding
Yes,
to maintain the staff that's here right now.
I would say I agree.
Thank you. For those of you who don't
He's
know,
effective.
I will be rolling off the grant in my primary role at the end of the year. I will still be at Asset. I've still got other work that I will be doing with Asset. I wasn't looking for a plug, but thank you.
No.
But
I don't want to lose you.
But again, I appreciate that. I will continue to work with Jeffrey. It's not by anything that I want to leave, but it's just, there was only so much money. But the good news is I'm still involved. I would like to remain involved, and to the extent that additional funds are found where it makes sense, I think the door is open. But that is where it stands right now.
One clarification on community anchor institutions. Eric had a misstart when he started to say Wi-Fi and that they provided Wi-Fi, but let me clarify that actually came up in this cycle. We had a call with the NTIA, with Ann Neville and Andrew McCrae, because we had a debate. We show the city of Phoenix at Sky Harbor Airport because it's the 5th most trafficked airport in the country and it has free Wi-Fi. We kind of stretched the rules of definition a little to include the city of Phoenix as a broadband provider for the purposes of the map, because we want people at the airport to be able to click on the airport and see who that provider is. But that led to the fact that there are another 15 libraries owned by the city of Phoenix that are Wi-Fi providers, free Wi-Fi, and so we had a nose under the camel's tent here with the city at Sky Harbor. The answer that came back from NTIA is mostly Galen and I would debate this in our own modest way. But there has been an evolution in the CAA model to have a flag field that says whether the CAIs are a Wi-Fi supplier. I don't know that we're actively filling that field, but there is the opportunity to expand the free Wi-Fi content with that. And so we didn't even know about it, or at least I didn't know about it until that debate came to a head.
Let me digress. I would like to bring us back into really kind of the purpose of we're here. We can get into a lot of the details about the CII, and there is probably some valuable data out there. I suspect we will probably have more anecdotal data as to where we should be moving in terms of areas of the state or in terms of populations where we're likely to serve, rather than that kind of data, and then maybe backfill our decision or our recommendation by does the data support this, rather than trying to do just raw data and find out hotspots from that. That's my guess, just because of the time.
Could we hear from some of the people we haven't heard from, such as David and such as the people on the phone?
You betcha.
Okay.
Well, I'm actually interested in one of the unique things, and it's not just to advocate. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Dave with Cost County High School again. And what my interest in it is, of course, from an education standpoint. I'm a K-12 worker. So, and I'm serving students from so many different areas out there. We have, our Costa Grande kids. We have kids from some of the smaller communities like Toltec, and even some kids from Eloy and other areas like that. And we go further out where we're really starting to talk about where rural is the Indian reservations that we're serving. We have Indian reservations to the south and north. And part of what we're trying to get at in education is getting that access to kids, not just for use within our school walls, but anywhere they go. Education doesn't stop at the wall of a school anymore.
Absolutely.
So, distance learning and e-learning.
Yeah, and now when those kids leave a school, like we have some one-to-one initiatives going, then there's this disparity once they walk out the door. Who has broadband at home, who doesn't? Yeah, exactly. Who even has access to it where they live.
Right.
So, and I'm still trying to find where I'm going to fit in with all this. I can tell most of the people here have been working with each other in the past. Yeah. So I'm trying to get my legs under me as far as that's concerned. But you can see where there's a real concern for something like this out there. And anything I can do that would help, improve our state or the state for anybody in the state, for Arizona would really be nice.
But even in other parts of the state you're from, there are businesses that are probably underserved today by broadband. They have some difficulty in finding.
Let me introduce a little different thread just for yucks. And then we've had discussions at HEIC and in some other meetings about whether we aggregate demand by letting people declare they don't believe they can have service. Now, that sounds like a good idea. Several problems. One is reaching people who don't have broadband and getting them to respond in the absence of broadband. So there's an absolute value to being able to say, I have 300 people in the town of Superior who say they would buy service if you brought it to them. But there's a whole lot of difficulties in parsing that, not the least of which is you're asking people without broadband to tell you that, and very hard to reach them, very hard to survey them, or perhaps very expensive to. But some thought about identifying demand from the bottom up, from the grassroots, may deserve some conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
David, where I see you filling a role, we met in Casa Grande a couple of weeks ago, is with your skill sets and your population. So if in fact you do get Phoenix Smart, and let's say it does come in, and you got 3,800 employees potentially that could work there, you're going to be working with a number of the folks in the resource cluster, like Mark was talking about before, and distribution. These are the types of skill sets that we need. We need logistics, we need shipping, we need distribution. So that could go back to the home, that could come through the community colleges, that could come through your high schools, back to the students as well as the mature workforce that could have access to those programs so that they could increase their skill sets, still retain where they live, and still make and potentially make a better living than what they're making.
Right, workforce is one of the things.
That's where I see you complementing and helping us. So I think, did I answer your question?
Yeah, that does.
Fred Estrella, we haven't heard from you. Fred?
We had a couple drop
Oh.
just recently.
Who's still on the remote line?
L. Crawford, are you still there?
Disconnect.
This is Mala, I'm still here.
Thank
Way
you.
to go, Mala!
Okay.
You get the Endurance Award for remote participants.
Kelly Udall,
Yeah, I'm still here.
please, would you tell us what you're thinking about for this group and your role? Why you're participating? In other words, how can this group help you?
Yeah, I think for small communities in Arizona, broadband, although we might have broadband out into our community, and we do, the amount of broadband is flying up. It's limited. So our capacity is diminishing. So what that does is it limits our ability to grow economically, to attract businesses that would demand that type of technology. And so for me and for a lot of our communities out in rural Arizona, we need to have the ability to increase our capacity to be able to attract jobs. And, not only that, but I think consistency in our when the weather comes in, the internet goes down. And so we need to somehow develop ways to make it more stable for us.
Weather comes in, it goes down.
I resonate completely with a lot of what was said here. That we need to have opportunities to figure out ways to get more broadband into our communities.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Are there any models in other states that we could look to that have already accomplished something like this?
There are, and they're all over the map. Some people, built state fiber networks, and those have largely been disastrous. And thus is a model we generally avoid talking about here with the state as an infrastructure owner, but rather as an anchor tenant. So there's a long-term thread where we talk about state, schools, and others as anchor tenants that attract providers. That's one of the best practices we've settled on, or seemingly settled on long ago. But that's one example. Certainly in Utah, there's the Utopia project. In Colorado, there was the Beanstalk project, which came and went. I mean, we have looked at, over time, in different studies. Commerce had a study 3 years ago. Our mapping study didn't really look at infrastructure projects, but looked at best practices in assessing and knowing broadband. Our recent right-of-way study that Mike Keeling and I authored looks at some best practices for regulation of right-of-way in California, New Jersey, national models. So I don't know that there's one set of best practices that apply to broadband in general. In the right-of-way arena, the perception is that if you remove or reduce barriers, the spreadsheet, the return on investment spreadsheet, can be shifted for providers where they're more likely to invest. That generally is a best practice we've now committed to pursue. So there are various reports and studies. There's no single consolidated textbook necessarily on it.
I have a comment and then I'll move forward. One thing that we suffer from, that may be too harsh, but is the places where they have been successful early on, and by early on is up till today, is places where there has been some significant leadership or strong proponents at the gubernatorial level.
Yeah.
And they're not fighting us, but they're not aggressively supporting us. So I mean, that is, if you were to look around the country at the states where there has been some measure of success, typically it's because there has been a leadership role on the political side that says and advocated. In some cases funded it, but in most places it was primarily advocacy, and then the advocacy led to funding through other sources. So we do have a little bit of an uphill battle because of that, but nobody's fighting us. But it just, we've got to build, we're building that, again, that nexus of support as we roll forward. We also, right now we're in a tougher state than we would have been 4 or 5 years ago, economically. Right. That's not, we can't change that. That's
the other problem with a lot of this is building a model that has sustainability. Mm-hmm. You know, you can get federal grants that will come and go, but then how do you create a model that is self-perpetuating and sustaining? So that's one of the tasks that we also have to look at, is how do we keep what we put in place sustained?
And the anchor tenancy is from that concern with sustainability, because you may get something jump-started, but you need customers to keep it going. And so that's a best practice that we have adopted. Reducing and removing barriers is another best practice. But there are major and minor best practices to be considered, absolutely. And there's some organizational familiarity with them that we do share, sometimes not even by calling it best practice, but by expressing an opinion about the viability of something. Feel free to challenge us and say, well, why? You know, why do you think that? And maybe then we'll say, well, they tried this in these 3 states and they didn't really work. Or here's a couple of places where that exact thing respun for Arizona.
A good example of what Mark's talking about is Tempe. Tempe invested a considerable amount of money to connect everybody supposedly in the city.
Well, to enable a commercial provider to deploy a muni Wi-Fi network.
It was not accepted. They put up stations all over the city of
900 Wi-Fi access points across Tempe.
Yeah. Okay. The customers.
I got to call time out.
Yeah, what are we going to do now?
I'm putting my PM hat on you. Thank you. That's exactly. We've got to do 2 things, maybe 3, depending on how you look at it. We need somebody to take responsibility for scheduling the next and future meetings. We need somebody to take responsibility for herding the cats. A leadership role of what kind of agendas will we have, how we will communicate amongst ourselves. Yeah, we will facilitate what we can to support room space and all that, as Mike mentioned earlier, but we just don't have the bodies to actually lead it. Nor frankly, is it appropriate. This really should be yours. And I think as a sidebar to that leadership point is to think about how will this group relate with the other groups when it comes time to actually put the real life proposal together. Not necessarily legislation, but the proposal and the pilots. I think the legislation you will see circulated pretty quickly in terms of where it lives today. The other thing that was passed around the room earlier from Bill, we've already PDF'd it, and by the time you get back, you already have 2 of the documents that were circulated around the table, and we will continue to bring those out. I've asked for permission to circulate those from the other groups. I'm sure it's yes, but as a matter of course, we always ask for it.
Just remember that what he got from me is draft. It's eligible for any kind of modification.
Everything's a draft.
Everybody's in draft. And that's been, first of all, we've seen a lot of excitement in all the group. And this is the part that's kind of the toughest because everybody's busy. We're asking to take on one additional level of busyness to move this forward. So, this is where the pregnant silent commences.
Yeah, this would be a good one for you.
Well, yeah, it would be, but Bill has a little bit of a problem with time.
Well,
So-
I know. But as far as organizing the group, you'd be a good one.
I don't want to do it. It's not that I don't want to do it. It's just a law of economics. It's just it'd be very tough for me to do. We just picked up some business Friday, so I don't think I'd be the right person. I just don't think the time is there for me to dedicate to it. I'm not trying to shuck it. I'll do as much as I can.
I also find myself bandwidth limited and don't want to, I want to contribute and partner, but I don't want to be the point of the spear.
I understand the dilemma.
And Deborah has obligated me to do the minutes of the medicine.
And I'm working on the healthcare group, the e-health telemedicine group too. So.
Who's still on the phone?
Yeah, who's on the phone?
Kelly. Well, it goes to Kelly Udall.
Well, Eric, we may be able to let that issue float for another meeting.
No. Really.
Somebody's got to schedule the next meeting.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Any volunteers here?
Yeah, I'll volunteer. It's Mike Whipple.
Thanks, Mike. Which are you volunteering for?
I just heard him say both. Mike, after we can talk a little bit about logistics and coordinating with Jeff and I, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Yay.
Thanks.
Mike, this is Oris. Mike, if you want, I've been playing my role of note taker, so I can go ahead and put together a summary of what we talked about and distribute that to assist you in getting this going.
Thank you.
And having been the recipient of many of Oris's notes, you have the best note taker in the valley.
Well, you notice at the last meeting, I didn't pull out my computer.
I did notice. We are honored.
You get a gold star.
Yeah, and here's the meeting from the Tupton Medicine thing.
Hold on, can't hear the phone.
Wait,
On the
somebody's
phone, start over.
Say again.
Sorry. I was just saying that you guys have been involved with all of the task groups. Are you seeing a lot of overlap? Is there some way we can consolidate the task force? These groups?
Well, Mike Golden talked to that earlier.
Yeah.
Yes, there are ways, Steve, and he discussed, some intent about both the cross-fertilization, about the circulation of distilled documents. I mean, I think we kind of had that discussion earlier.
I would say one thing I would ask each of the task group is, what is it that they hope to gain in some sort of 2 or 3 top bullets out of the pilot? What do they want to either demonstrate? What kind of area are they looking for from their specific perspective? So that the providers will give us that information of where would they be able to be helpful. Education would say, gee, where are the areas where it would make sense for education? This one, from an economic development thrust, where do you see of the underserved areas today would have the greatest where and what value would you hope to achieve by purpose of a pilot. I mean, economic development as an example tends to have something that is longer reaching, so it's harder to measure in the short term. But those are the kind of things I think each of the group should come forward with. What kind of ideas do they have, and then bulletize them so that when you get together, you don't have this group of blank stares, or you don't have chaos and everybody throws out something at once. There's something to share. But that's basically to provide structure to a thought process.
I like that very much, Eric. As a matter of fact, if we think about it and we can provide Mike Whipple with our ideas, that would be good. The one thing I'd caution anybody that wants to put together a plan is to make sure that, and it goes back to what you just said, is make sure that whatever our goals and objectives have to be, they have to be measurable. They have to be measurable by this group. There may be other things that are measurable by the communities or the regions, but for us to be successful, we have to know we have to make sure that we can actually measure what we're putting out there. Because so many times projects fail because they charge ahead and they have these rather ambitious goals and objectives, but there's no way they can meet their metrics. And as a consequence, people perceive it as a failure. And if you know it right up front, then take care of it right up front.
Well, of necessity, keep it where it's achievable. I mean, I know that's, again, this sounds really simple, but go forth and do good is not sufficient. There's got to be some things that you really, how can you achieve it? The measurement is critical. There was door number 3, and I'm drawing blank, just like somebody way more famous than I am. So.
One of the things I wanted to say was that it would really help if we knew what the baseline is. Because that baseline is a moving baseline, and if we don't capture the baseline data, then there's no way we can evaluate whether we've achieved our goals or not.
Then put together some points relative to baseline, send them to Mike, send them to the people here, so that we all have a good look at what you're trying to propose. We've got to communicate. That's going to be the key to this thing.
Gap analysis.
Have any of the other task groups
generate gap
defined
analysis.
what their goals are?
No.
Pardon?
Have any task groups defined goals? It would be nice to see it right
We've
in front what would
defined,
correlate.
we've defined, health group has kind of defined what they want to accomplish in selection. One of the things that was brought forth is, go to Access and ask them, what is your highest disease by region? And look and see if there's an economic basis for developing the last mile. Our key point is, how do we get the middle mile to the area where it'll impact the most and show a return and provide a profitable model that we can go on and replicate that to other areas.
And the word practically provide has to be in there.
Yeah.
You might be able to have a great impact, but you may be 100 miles from the nearest fiber and not be practical.
But I would say for this group, I would go after it just from your perspective, not ignoring all the others, but not letting them overweigh. Let them come together.
Right.
I mean, you're right. I mean, if there's something that is on the surface not doable as a pilot, then that doesn't make sense. But if it's questionable, leave it in there, and maybe if all 3 of the parts are in that same level, then it does make sense.
Fair enough.
Do some self-editing, but not over-editing. This is a tough one again because, like I said earlier, the shotgun strike makes it tough. By the way, for those of you who are non-golfers, shotguns mean everybody's on their own hole starting at the same time. It doesn't mean somebody's standing behind you. I just realized that if you don't know the golf term, and I'm not a golfer, but it describes.
It doesn't mean hunting with Dick Cheney.
Well, we won't go there either.
Probably running with Cheney than driving with Kennedy.
Okay, now that we've got both the parties on the table. But again, so thank you very, very much for volunteering.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks to all of the group for volunteering.
Thanks, Mike.
If you know how to get a hold of Jeff, well, not to get a hold of the entire asset team, find us, and let it. I would ask that as you schedule future meetings, whatever mechanism you use, get that to me or Jeff as soon as you can, just again for room availability. We're welcome to continue to use the many rooms in this building. Mala has I'm extending the offer. Mala has said that if we can't fit in here, that they'll find a place for us over at Carnegie. So we we probably will have rooms, but this time of year especially, the more advanced notice the physical meeting planner has, the better off you'll be.
And then Mike Whipple.
Can you find us a room for Gazelle's education reform meeting next month?
Ask Mala. I can't.
What date is it?
December 13th.
Steve, when is your Gazelle meeting?
December 13th.
It's December 13th.
December 13th.
It's going to be a luncheon. And so I understand that that Carnegie is not available for us on that day.
So you already checked?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I checked.
If it's food, we don't do food.
Do you have anywhere else that they might go, Mala, in the library community?
Oh, it depends on how many people there are.
About 100. We're expecting about 100.
And it has to be a place. It has to be a place, Molly, where we can have lunch.
Okay.
So that people can
We'll
have lunch, and like we do with our other stuff. It's like ATIC, and so we need to be able.
Do you need computer facilities
No.
as well?
No.
Projector?
No.
Yeah.
And calling in?
Oh, that.
Yeah.
For presentation, yes.
Okay, my turn. Can you guys take this offline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tent City.
Okay, Steve, anytime. Do call me.
Okay.
Tent City.
I will.
9263601.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Not that I ever have control, but I lost what little I might have had. So any parting words of wisdom?
Well, I just want to make sure we understand, I want to make sure that Mike Whipple understands what he committed to. Mike, are you going to head up then the scheduling of the next meeting?
Yes, at the very least. And no, Horace, I don't fully understand. I'm kind of trembling in fear and anxiety a little bit.
I think, Mike, what Eric is asking for, if I may be so presumptuous, is someone who will act as point, who will coalesce, some contributions, foment some dialogue, and reach some distilled summary of this task group's interests, needs, and desires. That we're not looking for a white paper, we're looking for things that generally the briefer the better, the 1, 2, 3 page versions of what this task group can contribute to the whole.
Well, contribute.
Yes, absolutely, and
what are you
I'm
looking for?
your utility infielder.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Mike?
I am your utility infielder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you mobile?
Just barely. I'm trying to get myself out for the Thursday morning reconvening there in one of those rooms with the K-12 Education Committee.
Okay, great.
Okay, Eric, anything else
Anything
for
else?
the?
I have nothing else. Thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Push the off button on that, right? On the television. Keep going down.
Thank you.
That goes tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow too.
I'm trying to get Dr. Pitt and Access Metlac together.
Okay.
See if we
How's it look?
You want me to get a hold of the doctor
Yes,
to?
well, I need to
I
get
just have
some
a lot of
dates from Access right
studying.
now. So I'll get those all. I'll get on the website.
Okay.
Where are your footprints now?
All right.
Where do you do business? Where do you do business now?
Four Corners. I
as soon as
spent a number of
I,
years working with
get
Segment One
the minutes
and building
together,
all the stuff under the
consolidate all
aggregation
the
and Tulsi.
Okay.
Dina, to
And
your
I'm
district
doing some
or
work
to
in
the
Mexico.
regular cops?
Good.
For
No,
another
Cox was
company and now.
overloaded. I can't find it.
Yeah, I know that.
Private consulting.
I'm probably one of the ones that
Sort of
overloaded.
working out.
Well, no, not really.
Challenging.
There's dozens on there.